webinar now, and I'm going to share screen. I'm not going to share screen. I'm going to pass over the hosting duties to Jen. So hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tom Pickerell and I'm the Executive Director of the Global Tuna Alliance. This is the latest in a suite of webinars coordinated by the Global Tuna Alliance to support signatories in meeting the Tuna 2020 Traceability Declaration. Today's webinar is on using a due diligence approach to improving global tuna sourcing and will be presented by Jen Cole, Senior Project Director from Fishwise. In this webinar, Jen's going to share the due diligence framework that Fishwise have utilised with their partner companies, looking to improve traceability and increase the sustainability and responsibility of tuna procurement. The presentation will focus on the tangible steps for meeting the social responsibility and government partnership commitments of the Traceability Declaration, as well as demonstrating how to embed effective due diligence into your company practices, support international labour principles, and contribute to global transparency efforts. If I could ask you to keep your microphones on mute during the webinar, that would be much appreciated. You can find the mute button in the bottom left of the screen or on the chat box function. That's just to avoid any feedback issues or background noise. We do want to hear from you. Your questions are very important. Your feedback is very important. There will be time at the end. Also, feel free to use the chat function if you want to put questions in there. I'll be monitoring that during Jen's presentation as well. So for those of you who are just joining us, welcome, and I'm delighted to introduce Jen Cole.
Great, thanks everyone. Can you all see my screen? Maybe Tom, since you're unmuted, you're the best person to answer that.
I can. It's something's happening. There's no presentation up yet.
Okay. I might mute myself for a second as I retry sharing. But I just want to say thanks everyone for being on the line today. I know that there's a lot going on in the world, and so I really appreciate everyone taking the time to participate in this meeting.
I can see your jellyfish. Great.
That's step one. So we'll see if we can get the rest.
Hi, I'm Tina. I can only join by phone. I'm sorry, the WebEx is not working for me.
That's all right. I can send along a PDF of the slides.
The webinar will be recorded. So the webinar will be recorded, and we will also be circulating the slides as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Can you see things now, Tom?
No, just the wallpaper again.
Okay.
If you go to share screen, there is an option to open the application. So in this case, PowerPoint.
Did that work?
No.
Okay. Sorry for the confusion, everyone. Tom, do you mind if I send you a link? Seems like my computer, I'm trying different applications and it still isn't sharing the screen.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
I don't know if any of you are in the same situation, but I'm also in my first days of working from home. So Santa Cruz, which is where Fishwise is based, is one of the counties and cities under shelter at home right now. So thanks for your patience and your ability to weather through this with us, because we use quite a bit of Google Slides and PowerPoints, so those don't always work as well with Zoom.
Have you sent by email?
It is loading now. But I'll just start the intro, and then Tom, once you get it, we can go along to the slide deck. But I did want to, again, thank everyone for taking the time to participate on this webinar today. It's really great to have everyone on and connecting. It does feel weird to be sitting in my apartment at home sharing this because of the new shelter at home as opposed to the Fishwise office. So I hope everyone else is staying safe out there. But the real topic of today was supply chain due diligence. And I think that might be a blessing in disguise, because really due diligence is a way of working that helps companies embed information about risk gathering and expectation setting into their own way of doing business. And so this is primarily for the purposes of meeting legal requirements or understanding and addressing risks, but it can also be for meeting policies and best practices. Due diligence is usually something you would want to have in place to prepare against bad things from happening, or to better steel your company and your supply chains in the event that they might happen. And I'll be talking about due diligence from the perspective of illegal fishing and human rights abuses today. Really, all of Fishwise's work that we have that I'll be sharing about today is wrapped up into the importance of advancing social responsibility and transparency in supply chains through our various channels and ways of working, whether it be our direct consulting partnerships or whether it is through free online platforms that we share out with others, like RISE, the Roadmap for Improving Seafood Ethics. Fishwise as a company has been working for nearly 2 decades. So first we started by engaging with partners in the seafood industry to achieve the most ambitious responsible seafood commitments. And we also spark learning, innovation, and collaboration by bringing together stakeholders to help create new strategies for combating human rights abuses in seafood supply chains, and as well as advancing more ethical seafood sourcing. And we do that through creating these novel approaches, tools, and learning platforms that empower the entire field to move forward. Like I mentioned, Fishwise's core competency is really working with companies. So partnering with them to achieve some of the most ambitious responsible seafood commitments. So our longest standing relationships are with retail companies. Thank you, Tom, for getting us here. If you could go to the slide that's on the due diligence framework. One more. Yeah, great. So we've worked with many retailers over the years, including companies like Albertsons Company, so the owner of Safeway, as well as Target, to help them advance their seafood sustainability. And Jenny gave a little bit of a teaser a few weeks ago when she was on this webinar. And she shared that we have a due diligence framework that we use with companies to really, in a comprehensive way, help them establish those good business practices that can mitigate human rights abuses, illegal fishing, and sourcing from non-environmentally sustainable products in a way that helps, strengthen their own business practices. So on the screen, you see an example of Albertsons Company's due diligence framework and a few activities that they embarked upon in 2017 and then 2018. This is really important because 2016 and 2017 in particular were times in which there was a lot of confusion, specifically around social responsibility in seafood supply chains, and especially for the US. So in 2016, Obama passed a legislation that prohibited the import of goods made by forced labor. In 2017, that was expanded to include North Korean labor. And really, we were seeing that companies, whether it's retailers or suppliers, were confused about what that meant for them and what due diligence they needed to embark upon in order to ensure that they were staying abreast of this legislation and promoting really legal, responsible, sustainable seafood. And unfortunately, it wasn't just seafood companies that were facing this issue at the time. When these laws were passed in the US, they stated that, products couldn't be produced wholly in part by forced labor. And I, in those years, had many conversations with the Department of Homeland Security. ILRF has a briefing document about this now. But it was really to ask them, what do you mean by wholly or in part by forced labor? And these were answers that at the time there weren't able to be answered by government. And so of course companies needed frameworks and ways of thinking that allowed them to address this uncertainty in how they were working on due diligence. So we partnered with many retailers to embark on due diligence progress with them. And through our relationships with these retailers, we're also communicating with hundreds of suppliers throughout the year. And one of the things that we were realizing is that we could make a lot of impact with these retailers and their suppliers, but there needed to be more resources for a range of different companies, whether they could hire third-party consultants to help them with their social responsibility practices, or whether they didn't quite have those resources and maybe only had one staff member who was splitting sustainability and social responsibility roles, or a few staff members that were trying to embed those practices into their own roles as buyers or salespeople. And because of that, we really understood that there needed to be a common open source platform that helped provide resources and knowledge to companies that couldn't necessarily hire out to get those resources. So Tom, if you could advance to the next slide. Due to this need, Fishwise created our platform RISE, which is the roadmap for improving seafood ethics. And what RISE really is step-by-step actions, tools, and resources to help companies that know that they want to do more when it comes to social responsibility or traceability, but aren't quite sure where to go yet, or haven't quite found the right way to devote financial resources through third-party consultants to this effort. So RISE was launched last year at the Seafood Expo North America. And one of the things that we've realized in its first year of existence is that there is so much, there are actually so many resources, actions, and tools out there to help companies improve. And then really the gap is to make them more implementable. So one thing that we're doing along the second year of RISE for, production and promotion in 2020, mid 2021, is looking about how to strengthen the resource and update it. So it's the most useful to build out services for companies that want more customized approaches through RISE, better align it with major international initiatives, and then, as always, make it more implementable. We don't want this to just be a resource hub for you all. We want this to be actually something that companies can go to and use and kind of plug and play in a way. And one of the, Tom, if you could go to the next slide. One of the main primary goals of RISE is to ensure that as we're working on advancing due diligence and addressing components of compliance that need to be addressed as a company, as we're working to meet that kind of legal floor, as we like to nickname it, RISE also helps companies aim towards the ethical ceiling as well. Because one of the things about the legal floor is that it's always rising, and the legal floor, as I shared with you in that example about what wholly or in part produced by forced labor means, that legal floor isn't always as clear as you might like it. So it's always in the benefit of companies to be working towards a more ethical ceiling and working towards more ethical supply chain practices, because again, the legal floor may not be clear, and it is always in the space between that floor and the ethical ceiling is shrinking every day due to not the ethical ceiling getting lower, but that legal floor rising. If you go to the next slide. Because there has been historically some confusion around what drivers legislation and international frameworks there are to promote social responsibility in the seafood industry, RISE does have a page that's devoted to understanding these key components of social responsibility. So it's the social issues in seafood page. And it helps companies to understand the definition of socially responsible seafood. And so this is something that we've based on the Monterey framework, which the Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions has aligned around as some of the key components of social responsibility in seafood. There's also a piece around human and labor rights and international frameworks. And those we see as kind of the guiding principles for how companies and vessels should act when it comes to human rights, as well as company obligations. So pieces of legality and compliance, how do laws differ in different countries, and what does that mean for you as a company? So on the topic of these key components of socially responsible seafood, when it comes to distant water fishing, the question of compliance and really working to not bring problems underground is more challenging than, say, in a processing facility on the coast. And so one resource that's linked in RISE is Fishwise's open water report. And so that provides companies with guidance on vessel transparency at sea. And because of this component of not wanting to bring problems underground and to really drive transparency at sea, a key piece of guidance and recommendation in that report is advancing vessel transparency through unique vessel identifiers and publicly available vessel lists. Because monitoring and enforcing activities of vessels fishing on high seas is particularly challenging, there can be a lack of mandatory permanent unique vessel indicators at sea. So one of the principal ways that vessels avoid enforcement and profit from illicit activity is through changing identity and ownership, things like flags of convenience. And so one of the most widely accepted and supported vessel indicators globally is the IMO Ship Identification Number Scheme. So many NGOs have aligned upon asking countries to require IMOs as a key step in addressing IUU fishing on a global scale. And then combined with the need for these unique vessel indicators, there's a need for transparency around what different vessels have undertaken IMO numbers and have adopted IMO numbers. And so another step in improving vessel transparency globally is the development, expansion, and adoption of these publicly available vessel lists. So in the paper, there are 4 vessel lists impacted, but one of the primary ones is the FAO Global Record List. So the Global Record is an initiative that primarily involves state authorities and RFMOs, but it helps to compile an online, comprehensive, up-to-date repository of vessels involved in fishing operations. And so as a vessel, in order to be included in the Global Record, there have to be a few different data categories, one of them being an IMO number, or another UVI, flag state. So what flag are you flying, your vessel name, your call radio sign, your length overall, and vessel type. And so these are kind of strategic vessel data that are collected directly from state authorities and RFMOs and help to ensure that this list, this global record, is trustworthy and verifiable. You can go to the next slide, Tom. So in addition to this need for transparency for distant water fishing, there's also a need to promote social responsibility more directly. And international agreements are a great framework around which to do that. So especially for distant water fishing fleets, a key component of responsible, safe fishing is actually safety. So the International Maritime Organization has 4 pillars for fishing vessel safety. So those include the Port State Measures Agreement, the Work and Fishing Convention, the Cape Town Agreement, and then the standards for training, certification, and watchkeeping for fishing vessel personnel. And these are really, this list, of course, isn't comprehensive of all of the different ways to improve vessel safety, environmental protection, and fisher rights and training. But the 4 pillars are intended to work together, really as a backbone for reducing illegal activity and promoting fisher safety and welfare on an international stage in an aligned way. And so that's why some of these agreements receive broad support from research and advocacy groups. So in order to facilitate the implementation of international legislation, companies and other stakeholders can do that through 2 main ways. So one way to help promote these 4 pillars of fishing vessel safety is through direct country engagement. So many of you on the line probably source from certain countries more at a higher volume than other countries. So I recommend companies look at the different regions that they're sourcing from and the different risks associated with regions. And through that kind of risk volume analysis, you know, really understand how they want to target their country engagement. So are countries that you tend to engage with promoting the 4 pillars of fishing vessel safety. So really kind of understanding that just as an activity, and then working to the extent that your company does have any government advocacy, you know, consider promoting letters, meetings, or other means to encourage countries to ratify and implement these 4 pieces of legislation. And so that's one way that companies and other stakeholders can encourage improvements along this alignment of the 4 pillars. Another way is through encouraging supply chain improvements. So by requesting improvements in your supply chain or promoting the adoption of practices that are in line with these 4 pillars for vessels that are working with you, it can help lower barriers that prevent ratification by country through improving in-country conditions or practices to help meet that international legislation, even before a treaty might be ratified. So again, like there are 2 main areas of working with these international agreements. One, through the promotion of the international agreements themselves, and 2, through kind of supply chain engagement and improvements. Go to the next slide, Tom. go back one. Yes, great. So the different ways that companies can help to improve sourcing for social responsibility, traceability, or environmental sustainability goals are really through three measures that I've outlined today. So one is really undertaking your own due diligence practices to improve risk mitigation in your supply chains and promote sustainable, responsible supply. And so that due diligence includes both the practices and policies that your own company implements, as well as its ability to share those out with suppliers and help suppliers to meet them through different activities. You know, I've seen examples of companies who have paid for certain improvement activities with key suppliers of importance to help share that cost and make improvements across the supply chain. So that's something that I recommend, especially retailers and end buyers do within their due diligence framework. Another thing is encouraging transparency globally. So as I mentioned, requiring eligible vessels in your supply chain to have IMO numbers and encouraging flag states to share vessel lists to the owner of the IMO registry, IHS market, as well as encouraging flag states to post those vessel lists to the global fishing record. And through that kind of flag state engagement, a lot of impact can be made as opposed to direct supply chain improvements. And it's a little bit harder, other than requiring IMO numbers, to make direct supply chain improvements in this area. And then the third piece is aligning your own supply chain improvements with these 4 pillars and supporting country ratifications of the 4 pillars of fishing vessel safety so they can be adopted at a more international level. I recognize that that is a lot to think about, a lot to learn, and also a lot to implement within your supply chains. Another piece that I mentioned at the beginning of this call was Fishwise's tool, RISE, the roadmap for improving seafood ethics. And so RISE has all of the guidance that I've listed on this page through different types of due diligence frameworks that you might use, information about what you as a company can do for your direct supply chains, as well as through country engagement for transparency and supply chain improvements. And as I said, RISE is something that Fishwise is working really hard on to improve over the next year. And one of the first steps for us in making the best and most impactful improvements to RISE is really understanding some of your own needs. The page of RISE that I showed earlier on the screen that was about, you know, how we put together an entire social issues page that included things like different country legislation. We did that because we saw that there was a lot of confusion and a huge need for it, and a lack of clarity around what might be required in different countries. So there are different ways to contact us, and Fishwise is about to start an engagement process with different companies in order to really understand what's happening in social responsibility right now and what you might want to see as future guidance in the social responsibility space for seafood. So if you go to the next slide, if you click on riseseafood.org and go to that page, you'll immediately see a banner that looks like the one on the screen saying RISE 2.0 is coming soon. Share your ideas on how you can best serve, how we can best serve your needs. So if you click on the box, when you see that page, it'll take you to a contact list. And later this month or in early April, we'll be sending out emails to everyone on that contact list so that they have a chance, either through one-on-one calls with me or other Fishwise staff, or online surveys to really share what's needed and share what companies need from the NGOs in this space in order to make socially responsible seafood easier. So, you know, if you're interested in learning more about socially responsible seafood or talking to us about what more is needed from consulting NGOs like us, please, again, visit that webpage, riseseafood.org, click on the button, and we'll be reaching out to you in the coming months. Yeah, and as I just mentioned, the goals of this engagement project are better understanding what makes RISE helpful for you. And the reason why I wanted to share it today is because we're also scoping more focused recommendations for specific supply chain areas of particular importance, and one of them is distant water fishing. So if you are participating in this engagement process with us, we can scope out those areas in greater detail and in a way that's aligned with your own needs. All right. Thank you, everyone. With that, I think I'll leave it open for questions or further conversation. You can unmute yourself or add questions to the chat box, as well as email me directly, and I'm at j.cole@fishwise.org. Thank you, Tom, so much for navigating this. I'm not sure what was wrong with my computer.
No problem at all. Thank you very much indeed. I'd love to open it up to questions if anyone has any. Feel free to just shout out or use the chat function. You can also do, you can just send a question to me if you'd rather it was anonymized. So please feel free to do that. We've got a lot of time, which is super. Just a reminder that you may be muted if you are asking a question at the minute.
Hi, Tom. This is Holly Kohler with ISSF. I had a question for Jen.
Hi, Holly.
Hi, Jen. One of the things I wanted to ask, and I think in your paper, the traceability transparency paper that you went through about vessels, you do mention additional resources for vessels to be identified in a transparent way. And you talked on your presentation about the vessel record, the global vessel record, which used to be called the CLAV, which is now now taking form. It's brought out of the ashes into a new form, the global record. And but the other one in your paper is also, you also mentioned the ISSF proactive vessel register, where we also have that as a public database that covers more than just the vessel attribute information that is on the vessel record. So we also have IMO number, flag state, area of fishing, but you know, and whether the vessel is fishing in the RFMO in which it's a member, and those other aspects, but go beyond the vessel record, global vessel record, by also identifying tuna sustainability efforts that vessels are engaged in, such as using non-entangling fads, having an observer on board if it's a large-scale person vessel, the use of bycatch mitigation for long-lane vessels, whether or not the vessel's on an RFMO IUU vessel list, and so on. So I don't know, I just wanted to mention that for the group, and I was curious if you had some thoughts on that in terms of how you feel or feel or don't feel that that's an important part of the for vessels for transparency, and how this can be used by market partners that are interested in due diligence in their supply chain. Again, this is public available database at a vessel level, and we have vessels from all types of tuna suppliers, from purse seine, long line, hand line, supply vessels, and so anyway, just thought I'd flag that for you because it was in your paper and I didn't notice that you mentioned it in your presentation.
Yeah, I think the ISSF proactive vessel register, for those who aren't on it, and a part of the omission might have been from the assumption that many participants on this call are already participating in the ISSF PVR. But the inclusion on the ISSF PVR list, I think, is really important, and it's something that is included in the preferentially included in the sourcing policies of many companies, whether it's retailers or suppliers. And one thing that I am especially encouraged by that the PVR has been doing over the past year or year and a half maybe, is also increasing the number of longline vessels that are included on that public, on the proactive vessel register. So I think the PVR is a great way as a company to continue to engage in different types of efforts towards these publicly available lists. And especially as the PVR continues to grow, it is a really strong resource for the industry. Thanks, Holly.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen.
Do we have any other questions from anyone? Well, I've got a quick question, if I may. It's linked to the topic that we just discussed. It's actually for Holly, but it's obviously tied into Jen's presentation. Is there a requirement for PVR participants to also ensure they're on the global record?
Hi, Tom. No, we don't have a conservation measure about the global record right now. ISSF has been actively involved in the CLAB and its previous incarnations, and actually many of the PVR listed vessels were included in the CLAB to begin with. But no, currently we do not have any kind of requirement for listing on the global record. But certainly something we could think about, but it's not part of our conservation measures currently.
Thank you. Okay. Obviously, if you have any further questions at all, anything springs to mind, please feel free to obviously reach out to Jen, or if you don't have Jen's details, reach out to me. I will pass it over to Jen, no problem whatsoever. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank you very much for joining our webinar. A special thanks to Jen for presenting. Thank you for sticking with us with the technical issues at the start. I'm glad we sorted it out though. Like I noted, if you have any feedback or any questions and you'd rather do that offline, we welcome that. We have recorded this, so the webinar will be made available via the GTA website. There will also be the slides made available on the GTA website as well, so you will be able to get that. It's under the documents. The next webinar takes place on Thursday, the 26th of March at 4 p.m. UK time, and this will be on the FAO draft guidance on social responsibility in fisheries and aquaculture value chains. And it will be presented by Auden Lem, who is the Deputy Director of the Fisheries and Aquaculture Department at the FAO. I think that should be a particularly interesting one for any of us who are interested in social responsibility. So great. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and thank you, Jen. And I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.